If you live in or around the San Francisco area, you have likely heard about the new Madrid, Missouri earthquake swarm that happened back in the winter of 2009. Even if you don't live there, it was a pretty big deal. It was one of the largest earthquakes to hit the contiguous United States since 1989. But it wasn't just one single earthquake, it was actually an earthquake swarm, and as we now know, the swarm actually produced over 20,000 earthquakes. That is wild. But what really made this swarm so interesting was that these earthquakes were not shallow earthquakes. They originated at depths ranging from 4.5 kilometers to 6 kilometers below the surface. But here's the kicker, they still managed to produce surface waves that caused strong ground motions on the surface. Now if you're thinking, why is this such a big deal? Well, it turns out that scientists had assumed that the San Andreas Fault did not extend deeper than 2 or 3 kilometers. So this swarm revealed something that scientists had never seen before, namely deep faults that still produce near-surface effects. Now, even though the swarm itself wasn't technically felt in San Francisco because it was too far away, this discovery was huge for the city because now we know that beneath San Francisco, there are these blind thrust faults that don't connect with the San Andreas Fault at shallower depths, and they could produce strong ground motions during an earthquake. These faults are called the Concord and Green Valley faults, and they run right underneath downtown San Francisco. Now it's important to point out that these faults don't pose any imminent danger because the likelihood of them producing a large earthquake anytime soon is very small. However, it does mean that we need to reevaluate our building codes and earthquake preparedness plans because they might produce stronger ground motions than we previously thought. Before we go into more details about these faults, I want to thank today's sponsor, Brilliant.org, for supporting this video. If you've ever been curious about how to program, build websites, or even learn math, then Brilliant.org has you covered. They offer thousands of interactive lessons on math, science, and computer science with new lessons added each month. Their services can help anyone learn challenging concepts by breaking them down into smaller, digestible chunks. This helps you learn concepts that might seem difficult by showing you the bigger picture and allowing you to learn concepts from first principles. And the best part is that Brilliant doesn't focus on teaching you formulas to memorize. Instead, their interactive lessons allow you to learn and practice concepts by doing. They do this by creating simulations and interactive visualizations that make learning fun and engaging. You can even share your progress with friends to see who can master each lesson first. Okay, now let's get back to the video. The two faults that we're talking about today are the Green Valley and Concord faults. As mentioned earlier, these faults were discovered due to the 2009 New Madrid earthquake swarm. Before this event, we had no idea that these faults existed, and today we still don't know much about them. They are both blind thrust faults, which means that they don't reach the surface and they have a low angle relative to the horizontal. The way these faults produced earthquakes is by having magma chambers below them heat up and expand. As the magma chambers expanded, they put pressure on the faults, causing them to slip. Now, the most recent study about these faults estimates that these events started in the year 9000 and ended in the year 2000. That's a pretty long time span for an earthquake swarm. But luckily for us, the earthquakes produced by these faults are relatively small. The largest one only registered a magnitude of 5.7. However, the real problem with these faults is that they're located directly underneath downtown San Francisco. This would be bad if a large earthquake were to happen because these buildings weren't built with these faults in mind. What this means is that the buildings in the area might not be strong enough to withstand the shaking produced by these faults. Now, it's important to point out that the probability of these faults producing a large earthquake within our lifetime is very small. However, that's not entirely true for the next few million years. Therefore, it's impossible to completely rule out the possibility of a large earthquake happening. So let's say that a large earthquake did happen. How would the downtown area be affected? Well, to find out, researchers decided to use computer models to simulate the effects of these faults on the surrounding area. They used computer models to create a virtual representation of the area and then simulated the shaking of the ground based on the location of the faults and their depth. They found that the shaking would be about twice as strong as what we currently expect from building codes. Now, there's some uncertainty in these numbers because we don't exactly know the locations of the faults or their exact depth. However, we can be fairly certain that the shaking will be stronger than what's expected from current building codes. Therefore, we need to strengthen our buildings to withstand stronger shaking than we previously anticipated. There are several ways we can do this. The simplest solution is to require buildings to be built on bedrock instead of the soft soil that currently covers much of downtown San Francisco. This would reduce the amount of shaking significantly. However, this isn't really feasible because all of downtown San Francisco is covered in soil. It would be too expensive and disruptive to remove all of it. Another option would be to strengthen the foundations of buildings so they can withstand stronger shaking. This is definitely an option, but it would be expensive, especially for older buildings. The final option would be to change the building code so that new buildings are designed to withstand stronger earthquakes. This is probably the best option because it would protect people who live and work in newer buildings. In the end, we probably end up doing all three things. The reason why is because even though it might be expensive up front, it would save lives and property in the long run. Changing building codes is easy enough, but it would also affect retrofitting older buildings, so that's probably why we end up doing all three options. In addition to finding these faults, this swarm also taught us another valuable lesson. We thought that the U.S. Geological Survey's ShakeMap was pretty good at estimating the strength of ground motions during earthquakes. This map shows the estimated peak ground motion for various earthquake scenarios across the United States. Basically, it shows the strength of shaking that different areas might experience during earthquakes of various magnitudes. The USGS uses this map to quickly estimate the damage that might occur during an earthquake. However, the 2009 earthquake swarm showed that this map might not be accurate. The problem is that this map is based on recordings from local and regional seismometers. The problem with using these recordings is that they don't account for side effects. Side effects are the effects of local geology on the strength of shaking. For example, soft soils tend to amplify shaking while hard rocks tend to amplify less. In the case of the 2009 earthquake swarm, the USGS ShakeMap underestimated the strength of shaking by as much as 4 times. This is a huge problem because the shaking might be strong enough to collapse buildings. Therefore, we need to improve the accuracy of these maps. Luckily for us, there's a group of engineers and scientists working on this problem. They call themselves the Strong Ground Motion Alliance. This group includes members from various universities, local governments, and private companies. Together, they are working on a new map that takes side effects into account. They are doing this by using a method called spectral fitting. This method uses data from local seismometers to create a model of how different areas might respond during an earthquake. They're also using machine learning to improve the accuracy of these models. Machine learning is a type of artificial intelligence that uses data to create models. By using machine learning, they are able to create models that are more accurate than what we previously thought was possible. Ultimately, this is going to lead to better building codes and stronger buildings. Stronger buildings mean that fewer people will be injured or killed during earthquakes. Better building codes also mean that we can save money in the long run because we won't have to pay for emergency services or reconstruction after an earthquake. Now, you might be wondering, when will this map be ready? Unfortunately, it will be a few years before it's ready. There's just so much data that needs to be processed. But once it's ready, it will be a huge improvement over what we currently have. And that's why it's so important to continue investing in research like this. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll be able to predict earthquakes before they happen. That would be amazing. Thank you again to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. I hope you learned something. If you did, please leave a comment below. And if you liked the video, please subscribe.